Today, I want to talk to you guys about one of the ugliest sides of America. It is a shame for a country which claims to be so rich and so powerful has so many homeless people today. And the worst of all, most of the American population lack compassion towards the homeless. This is the ugly side of America, which is largely due to systemic racism and capitalism. And I know some people will write hate comments about how systemic racism is bullshit, but those are the people that hide behind a screen in the comfort of their home and live a life of entitlement, yet somehow they feel they can righteously deny the existence of systemic racism in America.
Caused a surge in housing costs and a rise in unemployment, leaving nearly 600,000 Americans unhoused in 2020.
The number of Americans living without homes, in shelters, or on the streets continues to rise at an alarming rate.
Over 500,000 Americans today are homeless every single night. And a third of them are not in shelters, but are instead on streets every single night. A recent study showed that an average American believes that homelessness is largely due to substance abuse or mental illness. Well, that is incorrect. The highest percentage of the homeless population are people like you and people like me. Recently, a documentary was released on Netflix called Lead Me Home. The documentary follows a number of homeless individuals and families, and let me tell you, that is an eye-opener. The documentary is only a fragment of a very large issue here in the USA. Capitalists have even gone as far as taking advantage of homelessness by extorting millions of dollars from cities by providing housing for homeless. But a huge portion of those grants land into the pockets of people running these nonprofits. But that is a discussion to be had in a completely separate video. This issue of homelessness is not only in the USA, but it is a global issue. I know that, you know that, everyone knows that. And I know some Americans watching this will take offense to this video and will probably come back by saying, well, Germany has a lot of homeless people as well. It is true, Germany does. Germany has a large homeless population. Germany currently is at number 9 and USA is at number 10 in the world. But the reasons for homelessness between the two countries are very different. Germany's reasons are related to influx of migrants and refugees in the past few years, whereas in the USA, the reasons are shameful. This documentary shows that in the USA, homeless people are people like you and people like me.
Because I didn't want people to look at my kids. I didn't want to just be walking the streets. And then we would wait around for the library to open because the library opens at 9.
It is families like every other family that unfortunately have been dealt a very difficult time in their life.
And they could play video games and watch TV, and so that they didn't understand what the struggle was.
And a huge number of the population is a victim of systemic racism, redlining, and capitalism. And after watching this documentary, I realized that unless you are mega rich or able to maintain tons of assets, you can easily fall victim to homelessness. If I lose my financial stability today, I could be that person.
How long have you been experiencing homelessness?
It's been about 4 years. For homelessness, 4 years.
It dives right into how broken the USA system is. So the program interviews homeless people to qualify them for assistance, and when they do qualify and they do get into housing, if it's available, then at the same time they also qualify for other programs such as food stamps or EBT cards. And for my European viewers, EBT cards here in the USA are cards provided to people with low income or no income, which have a revolving balance. So each month X amount of dollars are loaded on these cards, which people can then use to buy food in grocery stores. Now the system is broken because as soon as these people start earning a specific amount of income, they no longer qualify for programs like the EBT card. Now they have to decide, do I feed myself, do I feed my family, or do I pay rent?
Bam, there goes most of your food stamps, and now all of a sudden the money that you had allotted to pay rent now has to pay for food.
Obviously they have to eat, but then they can't pay rent. And when they can't pay rent, they get kicked out of housing and they land back on the streets.
Because what is an immediate concern? Your child eating that night or the rent that's due in 2 weeks? I'm gonna feed my kid.
So this vicious cycle doesn't stop for them. According to a recent report published by a financial institute in 2021, 61% of the US population was living from paycheck to paycheck. Just in 2021. And if that doesn't sound alarming enough to you, 42% of the people earning a six-figure income were still living paycheck to paycheck. I know most of you might be thinking right now, well, Americans are known to live outside of their means, and I know that the American culture promotes buying on credit and getting loans, but this issue is not related to revolving debt. It is instead related to high cost of living, it's related to student loans, it's related to high medical costs, so basically it's related to basic human needs. Last year, STEPHAN and I went into Los Angeles and we both were so shocked to see that miles of Sunset Boulevard from Hollywood all the way to West Hollywood, people were lined up on the sidewalk with tents. People that were evicted from their homes for not being able to pay rent after suffering loss of employment due to the pandemic. And in some cases, these encampments are inhabited by people that are actually employed but are unable to afford rents. In Oakland right now, there's a homeless encampment in which there are working doctors and lawyers.
So there were doctors living here when they first got here because they didn't earn enough to pay for rent until they worked for a few months and they could save up.
Because you never think that people working in such professions would not have the means to afford an apartment. Now, I know a lot of people out there might be thinking, well, why don't these people move and go someplace else which is more affordable? But you have to understand that most of these people are here because this is where they have been all their life.
Most of these people were raised here. Most of these people were born here. They shouldn't have to leave where they want to be.
Some have been here for generations. This is their home, a home which was once affordable, and now capitalists have moved in and are taking over their homes, they're taking over their streets, they're taking over their neighborhoods, and they're taking away their jobs, and they're taking away their livelihood. But what is the guarantee? Even if they do move, case in point is, for decades, San Francisco got so expensive, but then the industry started moving to San Antonio, and now in San Antonio, Texas, the living cost is skyrocketed. The biggest population of homeless is a victim of redlining, which is a cause of systemic racism. For anyone not familiar with the term redlining, let's go ahead and define redlining. So redlining is discriminatory practice that puts services out of reach for residents of certain areas based on race or ethnicity. The largest victims of redlining are African Americans, followed by Native Americans. For Americans which deny the existence of systemic racism and redlining, here are some historical facts for you. Not that it will make a difference, because as we all know it, you cannot reason with an ignorant, entitled American. From 1607 to 1776, colonists steal land by force from native people and forced them to leave ancestral homelands, killing tens of thousands of indigenous people and spreading deadly diseases. The slave trade starts in 1619 when 20 slaves were stolen from their homes in West Africa and brought to Jamestown. This was the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. This was then followed by millions of more people being forced into slavery over the next 2 centuries. Then in the 1640s is when the earliest documented case of homelessness in the American colonies was documented. And then in 1734, the first poorhouse, which was basically the shelter for homeless, opened in New York City. Then the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1820s, which brought massive numbers of people to the big cities, and soon after that, many became homeless looking for work. A huge number of the unemployed were newly freed slaves and also runaway slaves. And then in 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, displacing tens of thousands of native people who suffered from deadly diseases, starvation, and exhaustion as they migrated west. This was the first major federal legislation which created mass homelessness. Then in 1863, after the Emancipation Proclamation, free blacks experienced homelessness. From 1865 to 1866, black codes were enacted in southern states to restrict the rights of African Americans and to force them to work in a labor economy based on extremely low wages. And then from 1880s all the way through 1970s, the great migration of black individuals and families from former slave states in the South to large cities in the Northeast, Midwest, and the West Coast began. And as they arrived, they were pushed into overcrowded, segregated housing. And the practice of redlining started in 1918, and it went all the way through 1968 via the institutionalized housing discrimination, which resulted in housing segregation across America and the exclusion of people of color from home ownership, and nearly eliminated the potential for multi-generational wealth accumulation. And since 1968 through current times like today, there is housing discrimination, there is gentrification caused by local zoning ordinances on communities of color to put these people, especially Black and Native American people, at a higher risk of homelessness. And adding fuel to this fire, this raging, burning fire, from 1972 all the way through 1992, there was an 80% reduction in federal investments in public housing. So for someone to disregard or say shit like systemic racism doesn't exist, I have no words for you. Your ignorance is not bliss. You are part of the cause of systemic racism. The documentary clearly shows this juxtaposition through the film. It doesn't talk about systemic racism, but it shows it clearly through its visuals. You see megastructures, you see capitalism, you see extreme inequality in income and wealth. And you can see visually the impacts of this. It's sad, but this is the reality we live in today in the USA. If you haven't seen this documentary, I highly recommend it. There's also a link which I've shared in the description box of this video for anyone interested in learning more about homelessness in the USA and how you can help if you choose to do so. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
Yeah. I don't want pain no more. I don't want no more pain. I can go see no way. Look at that with no pain. See the rain coming down, but it is not purple today. Came a long way from stacking and rolling that change. And all I ever wanted was some real love. Then I iced it on my heart, I watched it build up. My bro, he stayed with Susie Bob to build up. And I feel on inside, don't wanna feel it. Yeah. So I pour up inside my cup and I just sip till I can't feel it.